What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices meets a talk show host having the worst night of his career? What you're about to hear is the untold story of how Morgan Freeman, the man whose voice has narrated our dreams and guided us through countless films, found himself in a verbal battle that would end with him walking off a live television set. This isn't just another celebrity disagreement. This is the night that two vastly different philosophies about entertainment, respect, and human dignity collided in front of millions of viewers. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really drives these Hollywood conflicts. The tension was palpable from the moment Morgan Freeman walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live stage. The audience erupted in their typical enthusiastic applause, but something felt different that night. Jimmy Kimmel, usually smooth and calculated in his approach, seemed agitated even before the interview began. Sources backstage later revealed that Kimmel had been dealing with declining ratings and mounting pressure from network executives. His usual targets for comedic relief weren't generating the viral moments the show desperately needed, and tonight, he had apparently decided that Morgan Freeman would be his ticket back to relevance. As Freeman settled into the guest chair with his characteristic grace and dignity, Kimmel's opening wasn't the warm welcome audiences expected. Instead of the usual pleasantries about Freeman's illustrious career or his latest project, Kimmel dove straight into what he thought would be comedic gold. "So Morgan," Kimmel began with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, "I have to ask about something that's been bothering me. You've made a career out of playing God, playing wise mentors, playing all these noble characters. But in real life, don't you think it's a bit pretentious to always speak in that slow, measured way? I mean, do you ever just talk normally?" The audience fell silent. This wasn't the playful ribbing they were used to seeing on late-night television. This felt personal, almost hostile. Freeman's expression remained composed, but those who knew him well could see the slight tightening around his eyes. "Jimmy?" Freeman replied in his distinctive voice, each word carefully chosen. "I speak the way I speak because it's authentic to who I am. I'm not performing for you right now. This is simply how I communicate when I'm having a conversation with another human being." But Kimmel wasn't backing down. If anything, Freeman's dignified response seemed to fuel his desire to push harder. "Come on, Morgan. You're telling me that when you're at home, when you're ordering coffee, when you're arguing with your wife, you sound exactly like you do in the movies? It's got to be an act, right? Like, what do you sound like when you're really angry?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Freeman leaned back slightly, studying Kimmel with the kind of intense gaze that had made him perfect for roles as judges, mentors, and moral authorities. "Are you trying to make me angry, Jimmy? Because I have to wonder what the purpose of this line of questioning is." Kimmel laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that signals discomfort rather than genuine amusement. "I'm just trying to get to the real Morgan Freeman. Our audience wants to see behind the curtain. They want to know if the voice that sells them car insurance and narrates their favorite documentaries is the same voice that gets frustrated when the Wi-Fi goes down. The real Morgan Freeman," Freeman said slowly, "is sitting right here, answering your questions with honesty and respect. If that's not enough for you or your audience, then perhaps we have different ideas about what makes for meaningful conversation." The exchange was already more heated than anything Kimmel had planned. But instead of recognizing the warning signs and steering the conversation toward safer ground, he doubled down. This was the moment that would define the rest of the interview, the moment when Kimmel made the decision that would ultimately lead to one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. "Meaningful conversation?" Kimmel repeated, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "Morgan, this is a comedy show. People tune in to laugh, not to get lectured by someone who thinks he's above having a little fun. Maybe the problem is that you've been playing these serious roles for so long that you've forgotten how to be a regular person." Freeman's composure remained intact, but his voice carried a new edge when he responded. "Jimmy, I've been in this industry longer than you've been alive. I've worked with comedians, dramatic actors, directors who understood that respect and professionalism aren't obstacles to entertainment. They're the foundation of it. If you think belittling your guests is comedy, then perhaps we have very different definitions of what's funny. The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they expected from a Morgan Freeman appearance. This was something else entirely, something that felt dangerous and unpredictable. Kimmel's producers in the control room were frantically trying to signal him to change direction, but he was too deep into whatever he thought he was accomplishing to notice. Belittling? Kimmel's voice rose slightly. I'm asking you to be human for 5 minutes. Is that really too much to ask? You come on here with this whole dignified elder statesman act, but underneath it all, you're just another actor trying to sell a movie. At least other celebrities can laugh at themselves. Freeman was quiet for a long moment, the kind of silence that speaks volumes. When he finally responded, his words were measured, but carried the weight of decades of experience. In an industry that could be both beautiful and brutal. Jimmy, I came here tonight as a guest on your show, with respect for you, your staff, and your audience. I came here to have a conversation about my work, about the stories I've been privileged to tell, about the craft that has been my life's passion. What I didn't come here for was to be treated like a carnival act, expected to perform on command for your amusement. The words hung in the studio air like smoke after a gunshot. Freeman's response about not being treated like a carnival act had drawn a clear line in the sand, and everyone in that studio knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. But instead of recognizing the gravity of what Freeman had just said, instead of acknowledging that he had crossed a line with a guest who commanded respect across every corner of the entertainment industry, Kimmel made the choice that would seal his fate for the evening. A carnival act? Kimmel laughed, but there was no humor in it now, only defensiveness masquerading as bravado. Morgan, you're sitting on a talk show. This is literally what talk shows are for. If you wanted to give a lecture, you should have booked a university. Auditorium. We're here to entertain people, not to bow down and worship at the altar of your career. Freeman's eyes narrowed slightly, the only outward sign of his growing frustration. Jimmy, there's a difference between entertainment and humiliation. There's a difference between having fun with a guest and attempting to tear them down for the amusement of others. I've been on hundreds of talk shows over the course of my career, and I can tell the difference. Oh, so now I'm trying to humiliate you? Kimmel's voice was rising, and his usual television persona was cracking to reveal something uglier underneath. You know what, Morgan? Maybe the problem isn't with my questions. Maybe the problem is that you've been treated like royalty for so long that you've forgotten what it's like to have a real conversation with real people. The audience was becoming restless. Some were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others were whispering to their companions. This wasn't the Morgan Freeman interview they had expected to see. This was something that felt voyeuristic, like watching a private argument that should never have been made public. Freeman leaned forward slightly, his voice remaining calm, but carrying an unmistakable authority. Jimmy, I've had real conversations with real people my entire life. I've worked construction. I've served in the military. I've lived in the real world long before I ever stepped in front of a camera. The difference is that in those real conversations, people treat each other with basic human dignity. Basic human dignity? Kimmel repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. You're on a comedy show, not receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award. If you can't handle a few jokes, maybe you should have stayed home. The moment those words left Kimmel's mouth, something shifted in Freeman's demeanor. The legendary composure that had carried him through decades of interviews, through challenging roles, through every professional situation imaginable, was being tested in a way it had never been tested before. A few jokes? Freeman's voice was still controlled, but there was steel beneath the surface now. Jimmy, let me explain something to you about comedy. Real comedy comes from truth, from observation, from finding the humor in the human condition. What you're doing isn't comedy. What you're doing is trying to diminish someone else to make yourself feel bigger." Kimmel's face was flushing red now, and his handlers in the wings were making increasingly frantic gestures for him to wrap up the segment. But he was too deep into his own ego to recognize the escape route being offered to him. "Don't lecture me about comedy," Kimmel snapped. "I've been doing this for years. I know what's funny and what isn't. And what isn't funny is watching an actor take himself so seriously that he can't even laugh along with a simple joke." "Simple joke?" Freeman's voice carried a dangerous quiet now. "Jimmy, you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to convince me and your audience that my natural speaking voice is somehow fake, that my professionalism is pretentious, that my respect for this craft and for other people is somehow a character flaw. If that's your idea of a simple joke, then we have very different ideas about what constitutes humor." The studio was so quiet now that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. The audience members who had come expecting to see their favorite actor in a light-hearted interview were instead witnessing what felt like a public execution of professional courtesy. Kimmel, sensing that he was losing control of the situation, but unable to admit it, made the decision that would define the rest of the evening. Instead of apologizing, instead of acknowledging that he had misjudged his approach, instead of treating Freeman with the respect that any guest deserved, he chose to escalate. "You know what, Morgan?" Kimmel said, leaning back in his chair with forced casualness. "Maybe the real problem here is that you're just not as interesting as you think you are. Maybe all those years of playing wise old men have convinced you that you actually are one, when really you're just another actor who's afraid to let people see who you really are underneath all that gravitas." The words landed like a physical blow. Freeman was absolutely still for a moment, processing what had just been said to him on live television in front of millions of viewers. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of every year he had spent perfecting his craft. Every role he had inhabited, every moment of respect he had earned through decades of professionalism. "Jimmy," Freeman said quietly, "I came here tonight as your guest. I came here with respect for you, for your show, and for your audience. I've answered your questions honestly. I've tried to engage with you in good faith, and I've attempted to maintain the kind of professional courtesy that should exist between two people in this industry." He paused, looking directly into Kimmel's eyes with the kind of steady gaze that had made him perfect for playing judges and moral authorities. "But what you just said crosses a line that no host should cross with any guest. You don't know me, Jimmy. You don't know my story, my struggles, my journey, or what I've overcome to get where I am. And the fact that you would attempt to tear down someone you don't know for the entertainment of others tells me everything I need to know about your character." The studio was dead silent. Even Kimmel seemed to realize finally that he had gone too far. But instead of backing down, instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a moment of grace or humility, he made the choice that would end the interview in the most dramatic way possible. Freeman's words about character had created a moment of absolute silence that stretched across the studio like a held breath. Every person in that room, from the audience members to the camera operators to the producers frantically working behind the scenes, understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented. But Kimmel, his ego bruised and his judgment clouded by desperation and pride, chose to respond in the worst possible way. "My character?" Kimmel's voice cracked slightly as he spoke, revealing the insecurity beneath his aggressive facade. "You want to talk about character? You're sitting here acting like you're above all this, like you're too good for my show, too good for my questions, too good for the people who watch this program every night. That's not character, Morgan. That's arrogance." Freeman closed his eyes for just a moment, the way someone might when they're summoning every ounce of patience they possess. When he opened them again, there was something different there, something that anyone who had seen his performances as Red in The Shawshank Redemption or as Lucius Fox in the Batman films would recognize. It was the look of a man who had reached his limit. "Jimmy," Freeman said, rising slowly from his chair, I've been in this business for over 50 years. I've worked with giants of this industry, people who understood that talent, experience, and basic human decency aren't obstacles to entertainment. They're what make entertainment meaningful. I've sat across from hosts who knew how to challenge their guests without insulting them, who knew how to create moments that were both entertaining and respectful. Kimmel, perhaps finally realizing that Freeman was preparing to leave, scrambled to regain control. "Oh, come on, Morgan, don't be so dramatic. You're really going to walk out over a few questions? What happened to the tough guy who survived Shawshank?" The reference to one of Freeman's most beloved roles was clearly intended as a final insult, suggesting that Freeman couldn't handle real-life pressure the way his characters could. It was exactly the wrong thing to say to a man who had spent decades earning respect through professionalism and dignity. Freeman stood completely still for a moment, looking down at Kimmel with an expression that managed to convey disappointment, sadness, and resolve all at once. "Jimmy, Shawshank was about hope, about maintaining your dignity in the face of a system designed to break you down. It was about refusing to let other people's cruelty define who you are. So thank you for reminding me of that lesson," he began. To remove his microphone, his movements deliberate and calm despite the chaos erupting around him. The audience was murmuring now, some calling out for him to stay, others seeming to understand exactly why he was leaving. "This is ridiculous," Kimmel said, but his voice had lost its earlier aggression and now carried a note of panic. The reality of what was happening, the fact that one of Hollywood's most respected actors was walking off his show on live television, was finally sinking in. "You're really going to leave over this? Over a conversation?" Freeman paused in his preparation to leave and looked directly at Kimmel with the kind of steady, unwavering gaze that had made him perfect for playing moral authorities throughout his career. "Jimmy, this wasn't a conversation. A conversation requires two people who respect each other enough to listen. What this was a young man who mistook cruelty for comedy, who confused tearing someone down with building himself up. I wasn't being cruel," Kimmel protested, but even as he said it, everyone in the studio could hear how hollow the words sounded. "I was just trying to have some fun, to show people a different side of you." Freeman shook his head slowly, the gesture carrying decades of wisdom and experience. "The different side of me that you wanted to show was a fabrication, Jimmy. You wanted me to be smaller, more ordinary, more like what you thought people expected. But I didn't become who I am by making myself smaller for other people's comfort. I became who I am by respecting the craft, respecting the audience, and respecting the people I work with." The studio lights seemed harsher now, casting everything in sharp relief. Freeman had finished removing his microphone and was preparing to leave, but Kimmel made one final, desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Look, Morgan, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't you sit back down and we can start over? We can talk about your new project. We can keep things light. The audience loves you. They want to hear from you." Freeman paused at the edge of the stage area, considering Kimmel's words carefully. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually return to his seat, might give Kimmel a chance to redeem himself in the interview. But then he spoke, and his words carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "Jimmy, the audience does deserve better than what you gave them tonight. They deserve to see guests treated with respect. They deserve to see conversations that lift people up rather than tear them down. They deserve hosts who understand that real entertainment comes from bringing out the best in people, not the worst." He looked out at the audience, many of whom were now standing and applauding, showing their support for his decision to maintain his dignity rather than submit to further disrespect. "To everyone who came here tonight expecting to see a conversation between two professionals," Freeman continued, addressing the audience directly, "I apologize that you didn't get that, but I hope you understand that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own diminishment." With those words, Morgan Freeman walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage, leaving behind a host who finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost, an audience that had witnessed something they would never forget, and a moment in television, history that would be talked about for years to come. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, the studio lights still blazing, the cameras still rolling, faced with the impossible task of continuing a show after one of Hollywood's most respected voices had just delivered a masterclass in dignity and self-respect, by simply refusing to tolerate disrespect. The silence that followed Freeman's exit spoke louder than any words could have, a testament to the power of maintaining one's integrity even in the face of public humiliation. It was a reminder that true strength sometimes means knowing when to walk away, and that respect cannot be demanded, only earned. What do you think about how this whole situation unfolded? Was Morgan Freeman right to walk away? Or should he have stayed and tried to work through it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more stories like this, and let me know what other behind-the-scenes Hollywood moments you want me to cover next.